Mayday! Viper down! Viper down! Captain Isabella Voss dropped her coffee mug as her husband's voice screamed through the radio. The ceramic shattered across the floor of the communications bunker, fragments scattering like her world was about to. "Marcus," she whispered, lunging for the radio controls. Static, then silence. Through the underground facility's speakers, chaos erupted, overlapping voices, panicked reports, the distant sound of gunfire that made her blood run cold. "This is command to all units. We have a friendly fire incident at coordinates Tango 74. Medical evac in progress." Friendly fire. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. 24 hours later, they would tell her it was a tragic accident. A confused private in his first firefight. Wrong target identification. These things happen in war. But Isabella knew better. She knew who had pulled that trigger. They told her friendly fire killed her husband, but she heard the radio transmission that proved it was murder. Now, the most beautiful woman on the base was coming for the man who pulled the trigger, and he had no idea what was about to hit him. Welcome to Quiet Tale Studio. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and justice, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that some stories of courage and determination need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us share these powerful tales.
6 months earlier, Captain Isabella Voss had been the envy of every woman at Fort Blackstone. At 28, she possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations mid-sentence, emerald green eyes that seemed to hold secrets, auburn hair that caught light like burnished copper, and features so perfectly sculpted they belonged on magazine covers rather than military installations. But it wasn't just her appearance that drew attention. Isabella carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through merit, not privilege. She was a communications specialist with top-secret clearance, fluent in 4 languages, and respected by colleagues who might otherwise resent someone so effortlessly striking. Major Marcus Voss had been equally impressive, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that looked like it belonged in recruitment posters. More importantly, he was a decorated special operations officer with 2 Purple Hearts and a reputation for bringing his men home alive. Together, they had been Fort Blackstone's golden couple, the kind of partnership that made others believe in true love and happily ever after, even in the harsh realities of military life. Isabella worked in the Secure Communications Center, monitoring encrypted channels and coordinating with overseas operations. It was demanding work that required absolute concentration and discretion. Lives depended on the accuracy of every transmission she processed. Marcus led reconnaissance missions in Afghanistan, dangerous insertions into hostile territory, to gather intelligence and eliminate high-value targets. He would disappear for weeks at a time, returning with stories he couldn't tell, and experiences that left shadows in his eyes. Despite the demands of their careers, they had built something special together. Early morning runs around the base perimeter, quiet dinners where they talked about everything except work, lazy Sunday afternoons when the weight of their responsibilities seemed to lift. "Promise me something," Marcus had said one evening as they watched the sunset from their quarters' small balcony. "When this deployment ends, when we've done our time, we disappear. Buy a cabin somewhere remote. Raise kids who never have to know about any of this." Isabella had leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "Promise," she had whispered. That conversation had taken place 3 weeks before the friendly fire incident that would destroy everything they had planned. The funeral was everything a military ceremony should be: precise, honorable, and heartbreaking. Isabella stood ramrod straight beside the flag-draped coffin, her dress uniform immaculate, her face a mask of composed grief that revealed nothing of the rage building inside her. Commander Jake Sterling delivered the eulogy. At 45, he was a career officer with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that intimidated subordinates and impressed superiors. He spoke eloquently about Marcus's service, his dedication, his sacrifice for country and fellow soldiers. Isabella watched him with eyes that revealed nothing but saw everything, the way he gripped the podium just slightly too tight, the almost imperceptible pause when he mentioned the circumstances of Marcus's death, the fact that his gaze never quite met hers during the entire speech. She had reason to watch Sterling carefully, because 48 hours earlier, while reviewing encrypted communication logs from Marcus's final mission, she had discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the routine transmission records was a brief exchange between Marcus and Base Command, not the official version that went into the after-action reports, but the real conversation that had taken place in those final moments. "Command, this is Viper. We have eyes on the target, requesting permission to engage." "Negative, Viper. Stand down. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." A pause. Then Marcus's voice, confused and urgent. "Command, why are we backing off? This is our shot. The target is right here." "Viper, you will stand down immediately. That is a direct order." Another pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a note Isabella had rarely heard: suspicion. "Command, Jake, what's really going on here?" The response was immediate and cold. "You know too much, Marcus. I'm sorry." The transmission ended abruptly. 15 seconds later, the friendly fire incident was reported. Isabella had played that exchange dozens of times, each repetition confirming what she already knew in her gut. Marcus hadn't died in a confused firefight. He had been murdered by his own commander, a man he had trusted, a man who was now standing over his grave speaking about honor and sacrifice. The question that haunted her was why. What had Marcus discovered that made him dangerous enough to kill? In the weeks following the funeral, Isabella threw herself into uncovering the truth. She used her security clearance and communications access to dig deeper into Marcus's final missions, looking for patterns and anomalies that might explain Sterling's betrayal. What she found was a carefully constructed web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the base command structure. For over a year, Sterling had been facilitating the theft and black market sale of military equipment. Weapons, ammunition, even vehicles were being diverted from official channels and sold to the highest bidders. The profits were enormous, and Sterling had built a network of accomplices throughout the base to help him maintain the operation. Marcus, with his reputation for thorough mission planning and attention to detail, had stumbled onto evidence of the theft. His final mission had been intended to eliminate a Taliban commander, but Marcus had discovered that the same commander was one of Sterling's biggest customers. The realization that American weapons were being sold to the enemy he was fighting had prompted his urgent radio call to base. Sterling had made a calculated decision: eliminate the threat to his operation, then cover it up with a friendly fire story that would deflect suspicion and close the investigation quickly. It was a plan that had worked perfectly, except for Isabella's access to the original communication logs. Armed with this knowledge, Isabella faced a dilemma. Taking her evidence to official channels meant risking exposure to Sterling's network of accomplices. There was no way to know how far the corruption extended or who could be trusted with information that had already cost one life. Instead, she decided on a different approach. She would take down Sterling herself systematically and completely.
Mayday! Viper down! Viper down! Captain Isabella Voss dropped her coffee mug as her husband's voice screamed through the radio. The ceramic shattered across the floor of the communications bunker, fragments scattering like her world was about to. "Marcus," she whispered, lunging for the radio controls. Static, then silence. Through the underground facility's speakers, chaos erupted, overlapping voices, panicked reports, the distant sound of gunfire that made her blood run cold. "This is command to all units. We have a friendly fire incident at coordinates Tango 74. Medical evac in progress." Friendly fire. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. 24 hours later, they would tell her it was a tragic accident. A confused private in his first firefight. Wrong target identification. These things happen in war. But Isabella knew better. She knew who had pulled that trigger. They told her friendly fire killed her husband, but she heard the radio transmission that proved it was murder. Now, the most beautiful woman on the base was coming for the man who pulled the trigger, and he had no idea what was about to hit him. Welcome to Quiet Tale Studio. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and justice, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that some stories of courage and determination need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us share these powerful tales.
3 months after Marcus's funeral, Isabella received new orders. She was being transferred to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, the same facility that served as a hub for Sterling's weapons trafficking operation. The assignment came with a promotion to major and increased responsibilities in regional communications coordination. On the surface, it appeared to be a career advancement. In reality, Isabella suspected it was Sterling's attempt to remove her from Fort Blackstone, where her continued presence served as an uncomfortable reminder of his crime. What Sterling didn't know was that Isabella had requested the transfer herself, using carefully crafted channels to ensure her reassignment to his area of operations. She wanted to be close to the corruption, to observe it firsthand, and gather the evidence necessary to destroy him completely. The forward operating base was a harsh environment, dusty, dangerous, and isolated from the outside world. It was exactly the kind of place where irregularities could be overlooked, and inconvenient people could disappear permanently. Isabella arrived as scheduled, her orders in hand and her true mission hidden beneath a facade of professional dedication. To Sterling and his accomplices, she was simply the grieving widow, trying to honor her husband's memory by serving in the same theater where he had died. Lieutenant Ethan Cross met her helicopter when it touched down at the base. He was young, maybe 24, with an earnest face and the kind of nervous energy that came from being assigned to greet superior officers. What struck Isabella immediately was the way he looked at her, not with the calculating assessment she had grown used to from other soldiers, but with genuine sympathy. "Major Voss," he said, saluting crisply, "welcome to FOB Sentinel. I'm Lieutenant Cross, your communications liaison. I wanted to express my condolences about your husband. His reputation preceded him here." Isabella returned the salute, noting the sincerity in Cross's voice. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate that." As Cross led her toward the main facilities, Isabella scanned the base with tactical awareness. Guard positions, supply depots, communication arrays. Everything she needed to understand how Sterling's operation functioned in this environment. "The commander is waiting to see you," Cross said as they approached the headquarters building. "He's eager to brief you on our operational requirements." Isabella nodded, steeling herself for her first face-to-face encounter with Marcus's killer since the funeral. She had spent months preparing for this moment, planning her approach with the same precision Marcus had once applied to his missions. Sterling was waiting in his office, standing behind a desk covered with maps and operational reports. When Isabella entered, he looked up with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Major Voss," he said, moving around the desk to greet her. "I can't tell you how pleased I am to have you here. Your expertise will be invaluable to our operations." Isabella accepted his handshake, maintaining eye contact and professional demeanor despite the rage that threatened to overwhelm her. This close, she could see the man who had spoken those final words to her husband. "You know too much, Marcus. I'm sorry." "Thank you, sir," she replied evenly. "I'm ready to get to work." "Excellent," Sterling gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Let me bring you up to speed on what we're dealing with here." For the next hour, Sterling outlined the base's official mission, supporting counterinsurgency operations, coordinating with Afghan forces, gathering intelligence on Taliban activities. It was all perfectly legitimate, exactly what Isabella would have expected from a forward operating base. What he didn't mention were the unauthorized equipment transfers, the ghost shipments that disappeared from manifests, or the payments that flowed through untraceable channels. But Isabella could see the evidence everywhere, in the way certain personnel deferred to Sterling's authority beyond normal military hierarchy, in the subtle nervous energy that pervaded the base, in the fact that some supply areas were clearly off-limits despite her security clearance. "I think you'll find this assignment rewarding," Sterling concluded. "Your husband spoke highly of the work we do here. I know he would be proud to see you carrying on the mission." The casual reference to Marcus was intended to gauge her reaction, to test whether she harbored any suspicions about the circumstances of his death. Isabella gave him exactly what he was looking for. A brief flash of pain quickly suppressed, the reaction of a widow still grieving but committed to honoring her husband's memory. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "That means a great deal to me." Sterling nodded, apparently satisfied. "Lieutenant Cross will show you to your quarters and help you get settled. We'll begin your operational briefings tomorrow morning." As Isabella left the office, she caught a glimpse of something that confirmed her suspicions. On Sterling's desk, partially hidden beneath other papers, was a manifest for equipment transfers that didn't match the official logistics reports she had reviewed before arriving. The game had begun in earnest. Over the next several weeks, Isabella established herself as a dedicated and competent officer, earning the respect of her colleagues while carefully gathering intelligence on Sterling's operation. Her position in communications gave her access to transmission logs, equipment manifests, and personnel records that gradually revealed the full scope of the corruption. The network was more extensive than she had initially suspected. It included not just Sterling and a few accomplices, but dozens of personnel at multiple bases throughout the region. Weapons and equipment worth millions of dollars had been diverted over the past 2 years, with profits flowing back to accounts in multiple countries. What made the operation particularly insidious was its effect on combat operations. American forces were operating with inferior or insufficient equipment, while their own weapons were being sold to the enemy they were fighting. It was a betrayal that went far beyond simple theft. It was treason that was actively endangering American lives. Lieutenant Cross proved to be an invaluable ally, though Isabella was careful not to reveal the full extent of her investigation. Cross had his own suspicions about irregularities at the base, and his natural idealism made him a reliable source of information about personnel and operations. "Something's not right about the supply situation," he confided to Isabella one evening as they reviewed communication logs. "We keep getting shorted on critical items, but the manifests show everything was delivered." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "Have you reported these discrepancies?" "I tried," Cross said, his frustration evident. "But somehow my reports never seem to make it up the chain of command. And when I pressed the issue, I was told to focus on my own responsibilities." "By whom?" Isabella asked, though she suspected the answer. "Commander Sterling. He said the supply situation was being handled at a higher level, and that junior officers shouldn't concern themselves with administrative matters." Isabella filed this information away with everything else she had learned. Sterling was systematically suppressing any investigation into his activities, using his authority to silence potential whistleblowers. But Isabella had advantages that other potential investigators lacked. Her security clearance gave her access to information beyond Sterling's direct control. Her communications expertise allowed her to trace transactions and transfers that others might miss, and most importantly, she had patience born of absolute determination. She was building a case that would not only expose Sterling's crimes, but would be so comprehensive and irrefutable that no amount of influence or corruption could cover it up. The opportunity Isabella had been waiting for came 6 weeks into her assignment. Intelligence reports indicated that a major weapons transfer was scheduled, one large enough to require Sterling's direct involvement and significant enough to provide the final evidence she needed. Using her legitimate communications duties as cover, Isabella positioned herself to monitor the operation as it unfolded. What she witnessed exceeded even her worst expectations. Sterling personally supervised the loading of American military vehicles with weapons, ammunition, and advanced communications equipment. The convoy was met by local contacts who clearly weren't affiliated with any legitimate Afghan government or military forces. Payments were made in cash and precious metals, with Sterling personally counting and approving the transaction. Isabella documented everything from a concealed position, using equipment that would provide irrefutable evidence of Sterling's betrayal. But as she prepared to withdraw, she was discovered by one of Sterling's sentries. The confrontation that followed was brief but violent. Isabella's military training served her well, but she was outnumbered and operating alone. When Sterling arrived at the scene, she was being held at gunpoint by two of his accomplices. "Major Isabella Voss," Sterling said, his earlier pretense of warmth completely gone. "I should have known. Marcus always said you were too smart for your own good." Isabella met his gaze steadily, showing no fear despite her precarious situation. "Is that why you killed him? Because he was too smart?" Sterling's expression didn't change. Marcus discovered something he shouldn't have. He made a choice to interfere with matters beyond his understanding. "The same choice you're making now. The choice to serve my country instead of selling it to the highest bidder?" "Your country?" Sterling laughed bitterly. "Your country sent us here to fight an unwinnable war with inadequate resources and impossible objectives. I found a way to make the best of an impossible situation. By arming the enemy? By getting American soldiers killed with their own weapons? By creating opportunities and chaos, Marcus could never understand that. He was too rigid, too idealistic, just like you." Sterling gestured to his men. "Take her to the detention facility. Make sure she's kept isolated until we can arrange for her permanent disappearance." But Isabella had one more card to play. Before being captured, she had transmitted copies of all her evidence to a secure server accessible only to military investigators in Washington. The transmission was encrypted and automatically scheduled to be released if she failed to check in within 72 hours. "It's too late, Jake," she said calmly. "Everything's already been sent. Your operation, your accomplices, the details of Marcus's murder. It's all documented and on its way to people who can't be bought or silenced." Sterling's composure cracked for the first time. "You're bluffing. Check the communication logs. You'll find the transmission. Encrypted, time-delayed, and completely beyond your ability to stop." The next 48 hours brought a cascade of events that destroyed Sterling's network completely. Military investigators descended on the base with warrants and authority that superseded Sterling's command. His accomplices were arrested, his assets frozen, and his carefully constructed operation dismantled piece by piece. Sterling himself was taken into custody while attempting to flee across the border into Pakistan. The evidence Isabella had compiled proved overwhelming. Detailed financial records, video documentation of illegal weapons sales, and most damning of all, the audio recording of Marcus's final conversation revealing Sterling's confession to murder. Lieutenant Cross played a crucial role in the investigation, providing testimony and additional evidence that corroborated Isabella's findings. His natural integrity and attention to detail made him a credible witness, whose account helped secure convictions against several of Sterling's accomplices. The broader implications of the case sent shockwaves through the military command structure. Several high-ranking officers were implicated in the corruption, leading to courts-martial and criminal prosecutions that reached into the Pentagon itself. For Isabella, the conclusion of the investigation brought a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The truth about Marcus's death was finally revealed, his reputation cleared of any suggestion that he had died due to his own mistakes or failures in combat. More importantly, the exposure of Sterling's operation led to reforms that would prevent similar corruption in the future. New oversight mechanisms, improved auditing procedures, and enhanced whistleblower protections were implemented to ensure that the betrayal Marcus had died uncovering could never happen again. 6 months after Sterling's arrest, Isabella stood in Arlington National Cemetery beside Marcus's grave. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves turning colors that reminded her of the life they had planned to build together. She had been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for her role in exposing the corruption network. This citation praised her courage, dedication, and unwavering commitment to justice. But the recognition that meant the most came from the families of soldiers whose lives had been saved by her investigation. Young men and women who would never know how close they had come to being betrayed by their own command structure. Lieutenant Cross, now promoted to captain, had been assigned to a position in the Inspector General's office where his attention to detail and natural integrity could help prevent future corruption. He had become not just a colleague but a friend, someone who understood the weight of the choices Isabella had made. "Do you think he would be proud?" Cross asked, gesturing toward Marcus's headstone. Isabella considered the question carefully. "I think he would be relieved," she said finally. "He died trying to do the right thing, knowing that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Yes, I think he would be proud." She placed a single red rose on the grave, a tradition she had maintained for every visit since the funeral. But this time there was a sense of completion to the gesture. She had honored Marcus's memory not just with grief, but with action. She had ensured that his death served a purpose beyond the corruption that had claimed his life. "What's next for you?" Cross asked as they walked back toward the cemetery entrance. Isabella looked up at the sky, where contrails from military aircraft traced geometric patterns against the blue. "I've been offered a position with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service," she said. "Investigating military corruption, exposing betrayal, making sure what happened to Marcus doesn't happen to anyone else." It was work that would take her away from the front lines, away from the immediate dangers of combat operations. But it was work that mattered, work that honored the memory of a good man who had died trying to protect his fellow soldiers. As they reached the cemetery gates, Isabella turned back for one final look at the rows of white headstones stretching across the landscape. Each one represented a life given in service to country, a sacrifice made by someone who believed in something larger than themselves. Marcus's grave was just one among thousands, but his story, their story, would serve as a reminder that the greatest battles aren't always fought against foreign enemies. Sometimes they're fought against the corruption and betrayal that can destroy a military from within. 2 years later, Major Isabella Voss had become one of the most respected investigators in the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Her work had led to the exposure of 3 major corruption networks, the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen equipment, and the prosecution of dozens of military personnel who had betrayed their oaths. She had also found a new sense of purpose that went beyond personal vengeance or grief. The investigation skills she had developed to expose Sterling's network had evolved into a systematic approach to rooting out corruption wherever it existed in the military structure. Her reputation was such that she was often called in to handle the most sensitive cases, situations where the corruption reached into high levels of command, where traditional investigative approaches had failed, or where the stakes were too high to risk exposure or cover-up. The work was demanding, often dangerous, and frequently lonely. But it was also deeply fulfilling in a way that her previous military assignments had never been. She was making a difference not just in individual cases, but in the larger culture of accountability and integrity that protected American service members worldwide. On the 2nd anniversary of Marcus's death, Isabella received a letter from a young soldier stationed in Afghanistan. His unit had been equipped with weapons that should have been diverted to Sterling's black market network, but which had instead reached their intended destination because of Isabella's investigation. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," the letter said, "but I wanted you to know that the rifle that saved my life last week was one that might have been sold to the enemy if not for your work. My squad leader told me about what you did, about how you exposed the corruption that was getting soldiers killed. I just wanted to say thank you, and to let you know that Major Marcus Voss's sacrifice wasn't forgotten." Isabella read the letter twice, then carefully filed it with similar communications she had received from other soldiers and their families. They were reminders of why the work mattered, why the pursuit of justice was worth the personal cost it demanded. That evening, she called Lieutenant Colonel Cross. He had been promoted again, his career flourishing in his new role fighting military corruption. They maintained their friendship, despite their different assignments, bound together by their shared experience of exposing Sterling's network. "Have you ever regretted it?" he asked during their conversation. "Going after Sterling, I mean. The investigation, the risk, all of it?" Isabella considered the question, looking out the window of her apartment at the lights of Washington, D.C. "No," she said finally. "Marcus died, believing in something worth fighting for, making sure his death had meaning. That's not something I could ever regret." The truth was more complex than that simple answer suggested. The investigation had cost her the quiet life she and Marcus had planned. It had thrust her into a world of perpetual suspicion and danger, where enemies could hide behind friendly faces and betrayal could come from those sworn to the same oath. But it had also given her a purpose that transcended personal loss. In exposing Sterling's corruption, she had protected countless soldiers who would never know their names. In pursuing justice for Marcus, she had found a way to honor not just his memory, but the ideals they had both served. Some battles, Isabella had learned, weren't fought on foreign battlefields or against easily identified enemies. Some battles were fought in the spaces between what should be and what was, where courage was measured not by heroic charges but by the willingness to stand up against corruption and betrayal regardless of the personal cost. The scar on her heart from Marcus's loss would never fully heal. But it had become something more than just a wound. It had become a source of strength, a reminder of what was worth fighting for, and a compass that pointed always toward justice. This story was brought to you by Quiet Tale Studio. Have you ever known someone who fought for justice when it would have been easier to stay silent? Share their story in the comments below, and let us know what city you're watching from today. If stories of courage in the face of corruption and betrayal inspire you, hit that subscribe button and help us continue sharing tales of those who refuse to let injustice go unchallenged. These stories matter, and with your support, we can ensure they're heard. Remember that sometimes the greatest courage is shown not on the battlefield, but in the choice to seek truth and justice no matter the personal cost. And sometimes the most important victories are won not with weapons, but with evidence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.